pad, that would be great. So, or hedge doc, whatever it's called now. All right, looks like it's time to get going with EMU. Okay, welcome to EMU IETF 124 here in Montreal. Here we have the note well. This is policies that an outline of policies that you've agreed to at various points during your registration and other things. It covers things like IPR, behavior, and please, good idea to kind of follow these links and understand what your obligations are. And if you have questions, you can ask working group chair, you can ask the area directors, yeah. So moving on from that, please join with the on-site tool so we know how many people. I don't want to lose count of folks here because we want to make sure we get a appropriate size room for next time. Yeah, we'll use it to manage the queue for people that are online as well. As usual, keep your video and audio off until you are scheduled or ready to speak. Okay, I think probably you're well aware of this information by now in terms of the resources. And we have an agenda. We'll talk briefly about document status. And then I have a proposal since Michael is double booked. I think we will move EAP defaults for devices that need to onboard to the first slot so that he can present and we can have a short chat about that and then move on to the regularly scheduled working group items. This is, I think we'll have plenty of time for this meeting. So I think that's a good switch. Does anybody have concerns with that kind of bashing of the agenda? All right. So just for, we have note takers for a document update. We have a number of documents kind of in various processes going towards IESG. I think Peter just submitted EAP ad hoc. So we're looking pretty good there. We have a bit more, still have some work documents, in particular the EAP aka post-quantum ones, which I think are probably the next ones that will go forward, but we'll have to see. All right. Michael, why don't you take it away? Let me get your slides and I'll give that thing.
Thanks for accommodating me. Alex in the room? Yeah, there he is.
Okay.
He had some questions. Good.
Hold on. You should have that. The clicker should be working.
Good. Okay, so these is largely unchanged from Madrid. I was asked to talk about it again, so we didn't talk about it that much then. The document is mostly unchanged. The slides are different. So EAP TLS has an open, undefined thing of what to do if the client doesn't provide an identity. And the proposal here is to say, well, if you don't have identity, we'll let you in and we'll put you in some magic network where you will actually perhaps be able to get one. And so for a laptop, phone, blah, blah, blah kind of thing, then the obvious thing is, to me anyway, is that you would be put into a captive portal. You may then, enter some kind of thing that maybe proves you really are a member of that enterprise. And maybe they'll give you some credentials at that point through something like this. If it's an IoT device, then you might get to do an onboarding protocol, and now you can do it with IP over Ethernet, rather than having to munge something into EAP. So an obvious one would be EAP TEEP. but it's not clear that that to me is the bigger ender thing. So we use an explicit NAI. The proposal is onboarding at tls.eap.arpa. We now have the eap.arpa zone. I think that's in the RFC editor queue. And some of that work was ripped out of this document to do it more generically. So you'd signal that as your NAI. You would offer likely no credential as the client. And Alex has asked, why couldn't you use some credential? And that's something we could discuss if you want to adopt. And it could also be that you would wind up there because you did go through all the credential dance, but in the process, they realized, or the network realized, that you either were unsafe, you didn't pass some remote attestation or something else check, or you still have to do one, or I don't know, your credentials have expired, they're not yet there, something else has to happen and you need to do something. So the quarantine network could have some things like that. Click, there we go. So one of the problems historically with trying to build Wi-Fi onboarding networks that were just for onboarding is that, at least in the enterprise space, they often have many SSIDs. There are many on many access points. And when you add more SSIDs, you use up more capacity, because the beacons there's a beacon per SSID which is sent, and furthermore, they're sent at the lowest speed with the highest power. So they use up a lot of airtime. And so there's some practical limit around 12 or 16 SSIDs on a network, and then you basically consume so much airtime that you can't do it anymore. So enterprises like to reduce the number of things. They usually need a separate VLAN and a whole bunch of other stuff to backhaul all that stuff. So having one that is just for one only thing onboarding becomes a pain in the butt. On the other hand, they almost all want to have some kind of a guest network, captive portal, something else like this, and that's worth paying for. So the idea is that if you show up without an identity, well, instead of putting you on the SSID, which was the guest network, which might be unencrypted, or having, in some cases I've seen, there's a poster on the wall that's changed every week, which has some WPA password that somehow gets you on, but then they change it every 2 weeks because they don't want you to camp outside their door and use their network. So in that case, you know what? Drop you onto a captive portal network, do the right captive portal dance to become a guest user. Or if you're an IoT device, then you do some discovery to learn about what things are. This is actually useful beyond just say I do Brewski, but OPC UA, for instance, doesn't have a way of doing Wi-Fi onboarding because they don't know how to get their devices onto a Wi-Fi. But once that happens, it's actually trust on first use, whether you like that or not, irrelevant. But the point is that it would be much more useful, much more pleasant if it was encrypted. So even though EAP TLS with this thing may have no client ID, it still does all the other EAP things, including creating an MSK and all that kind of stuff. So you do get a per device encryption. There's other mechanisms that are showing up to do this, but this seems like, to me, the simplest way because it involves no new methods, no new things. It's mostly just changes to the back end to make things happen, and obviously the client. So there was some updates that happened there. We discussed this in Madrid, some of their no onboarding at TLS or nobody was the other idea. Any one of those would be correct. You just got to pick one. And that's really about it. Any questions? I would very much like it if this working group would adopt it. And, we kind of didn't have that discussion since Madrid, but that would be a great one to have. Anybody have any questions? Alex has asked some good questions in the list this morning.
Heikki.
Yes, Heikki Vatiainen. So just one thing that I posted on the mailing list not too many minutes ago, and I just thought, would it be useful to have a separate EAP type when the client is not expected to authenticate with certificate, just to have this kind of belt and suspenders kind of thing, that you have the EAP ARPA, that takes care of the routing it to and tells that no client certificate is expected. But if we have a EAP type, then it's clearer. But with that said, I can
I'm not
live with those
opposed to.
options. Yeah.
I'm not opposed to that conceptually. The concern I have is how much plumbing is required on the client access points, radius plus, whatever is needed to plumb all that through. Whereas with the existing one, it's likely that existing software could be convinced to do this without changes. I mean, not automatically without changes, but we don't have to do a lot of work at that end. And it's really just the changes on the server to say, ooh, I don't see a thing here. I have a policy that applies to that. And all the rest stays the same.
Yep.
And so that's why I'm a little bit reluctant to go that way, but I'd be happy to be convinced if you think that's.
No, I'm just thinking that this client certificate authentication is the core feature of EAP TLS, and if we have the same type number, it's
yeah. Type numbers are 8 bits, as I recall.
Yeah.
But we don't have more than a dozen of them right now.
And also, are there other systems except of outside of EAP TLS client and server that would need to know that there is EAP TLS going on where the client is not authenticated? So other systems also, do we need to consider them?
I don't think so. I think that you because of the NAI, you don't get proxied or routed anywhere else.
Yep.
So that's important. So it's not leaving that enterprise. You might get punted around within that enterprise, but you're not going to. It's not like you're going to do EduRoam over this or something like that.
Sure.
So so I don't think any of that matters. It's a local-ish decision. We know that, or I know that in a home and network that you could do all of this within host APD without requiring the radius level, because it does all that. And it's relatively straightforward. I just haven't cleaned my patches up to make them, usable to anybody else.
Yeah, I'm fine with EPARP. I was just thinking that is there anything else that we need to consider? But I can live with EPARP only. Thanks.
Whoever's next, Jan.
Hi, Jan Friedrichs. Heike talked about client authentication. I have to admit I haven't read the draft in the current version yet, but server authentication could theoretically also be thrown out because the client doesn't have any trust anchor to determine if the server certificate that the server would present is trusted. So in theory, we could do completely anonymous TLS and use TLS or EAP TLS with the TLS handshake just as a vehicle to get an encrypted Wi-Fi channel and then do the onboarding afterwards, because we don't have any means to establish a trust from that the client would trust the server anyway, because we're doing onboarding, right? Or is there some other means to establish the trust?
So potentially there you could have a future where we have server certificates that have some anchors that do something that the client could do thing. I say theoretically because today it's not a reality, but we could get there. So that's why I'm pushing back, like, well, maybe not. So I would prefer to include the server authentication even if the client can't do it. The other thing that I'm thinking about is that if you have a number of networks that you can join, one of the tests as to whether this is a network you've seen already is, does it have the same server certificate, even though many other things could be different, right? So that at least lets you go, oh, I've been here already, it didn't work, let's move on.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, and so that's at least, there are other ways to identify it, but that seems like a fairly, definite. Now there are opposites where you could wind up with at a different EAP TLS endpoint because of load balancing or something. And so actually multiple servers offer the same network, but that's a pathology that I don't think we could deal with. Yeah.
And I agree, we need dreamers that PKI will at some point be fixed.
We shouldn't, I think we shouldn't do things to put further hurdles in that even if, you know, it's a pipe dream, right?
Okay, so speaking as a participant, but sitting here, I concerned a little bit about this, what we do with server authentication, right? Because in some cases it may work out, it may not, you know, but it might, I kind of like right now, without really thinking too much about it, Heike's suggestion of like, maybe we do want a different EAP method, just so you kind of have that expectation that like I'm going on to a provisioning network versus going on to the whole thing. So if I can't recognize the certificate, maybe it's not a big deal, right? For a server auth. But I think that needs more discussion, but
So if the client is going to use a different EAP type, then the client is going to already know that it's done that, right? Right.
Right.
So the client, it's not like the client is entering into this unaware.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
And
so instead of using the EAP TLS EAP type, you use a different one.
right.
And maybe that's what maybe that wasn't his
That's
point.
what Hickey was suggesting.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's all I have.
Yeah, this is Alan. To address that, I don't know it's that important. I mean, it's not a terrible idea, but if you're doing EAP TLS and not presenting a client certificate and using, you know, onboarding at tls.eap.arpa, that's already a pretty strong signal. And then to a certain extent, you don't really care what the server certificate is, because once you have an actual network, you have an entire web PKI that you can use. And that really is the goal here. So that's my 2 cents on that note. The other one, and this is partly channeling Elliot, that I've talked to him about this issue. His comment is that there are circumstances where this can't be used because the local network can't do a captive portal for whatever reasons. That being said, as various other people have pointed out on the list, there are still situations where this is useful, right? So I think this is overall useful and a good thing to do.
So one of the I think interesting cases is, you know, you have to get on this network, you have to do some remote attestation, you discover that you are not compliant, and that captive network lets you get to your update servers to get some patches, which lets you then, you know, now that's not that you didn't have a credential, it's that the system said, and you haven't done the right thing, so I'm putting you on the captive network independently of this process, right? But on the captive network, you may discover some other things that help you get back to normalcy, right?
Alex Kluter, Core Mem Limited. Reiterating sort of what. Hello. Whoa, okay. Reiterating kind of what Janfred said. I think it's a good idea to do just a ignore the server certificate outright, because right now today you have just got the solution is just an open access point that you're all connecting to. You do get these. Right. Everyone's going to get their own key at that point.
And it includes features like ARP spoofing.
Exactly.
Right. Which this gets rid of. Yeah.
So along with that, it feels like maybe the situation we might be able to, I've mentioned on the mailing list, we might be able to figure out something better for, are you entitled to provision on this network rather than connecting to each one? I don't know what that would look like. As I said, it was just spitballing.
So one of the things that has been discussed, and I think some people have deployed in the context of DPP, is that the beacon includes a Bloom filter, which you can then compare your MAC address, your client MAC address, to find out if that network is expecting you. Now, it comes with all sorts of other caveats about, you know, can you access that beacon, period, and why DPP has not been successful in that space. And one of the things you could do in this captive network is you could use the newly spec'd, I think it came out of our working group, TLS, what was the document called, Dan? And It uses the DPP mechanisms to authenticate TLS.
Yeah, TLS
Okay.
POC or something.
Yeah. So the point is you can do that. Now you can do it over IP rather than trying to do it over EAP. And that may be a different onboarding method that you're going to use. But now it's driven by the QR cards that DPP, I think, really successful. The only problem with it was it used this public frame that, you know, there were people in the last hackathon here, 2019, that were struggling to do that. And then the chips that they had, guess what happened to them during the supply chain crunch? They're all gone. So, like, that's why nobody can use it, right?
Otherwise, I like the draft.
Yeah. Okay. Someone else, one last person here.
Hey, it's Mark here. Can you hear me okay?
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, so just 2 points. As I replied on the email, there is discussion going on with FIDO Alliance to deliver the FDO voucher using SCIM, but then also onboard using EAP TLS with trust on first use, and then obviously to get onto the network to then perform the FDO TO2 transfer of ownership protocol, where you would then provision the permanent credential into the
Right.
device. So that, I guess that's an equivalent of your Brewski, but using FDO device initialization, I guess, as the baseline. So that's number one. Number two, just for network selection, which is a problem specifically for, I guess, for headless devices. WBA has allocated a bit in their RCOI, which is specific for this particular use case, where they call it a short-lived credential to allow you to have connectivity to enable you to provision a long-lived credential. And that has typically will have a session timeout limit sufficient for you to perform that transfer of ownership and permanent credential provisioning, but nothing else, so it can't be abused. So there are ways defined for using Passpoint to discover these networks and then seamlessly trigger the authentication to then perform the provisioning of that long-lived credential. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Heikki, again, your last word, I guess.
Yes, just a short note that it sounds good that if server certificate validation is also skipped, but then we really have an EAP TLS that used to be mutual authentication, and now there's no authentication at all. So
I don't want to I don't want to skip the server authenticating itself. I want to skip the client trying to validate the certificate.
okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that lets us bootstrap better into something where the certificate does have meaning.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't want to remove that side of the process. It's like, well, the client may not know anything about this cert path, or it might, right? And there's possibilities in the future going both ways. I don't want to remove any of those possibilities. So that's why I'm saying I don't want to go for an unauthenticated TLS. I want to go for a unvalidated certificate now. And you could validate that certificate later on in the onboarding protocol. And that's what many of them do.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. Sorry, I have to go to rats and
Yeah.
thank you.
I will just ask, I'm going to put up a quick show of hands just to see if there is anybody who thinks this is not a good idea, would not be wanting to adopt something like this into the working group.
Yeah, I'm going to run, let you do that. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, let's see. Mark, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, so if we're ending up with something which is neither side is authenticating, then we've effectively replicated opportunistic wireless encryption, OWE, which is obviously there from a Wi-Fi perspective. So I guess the question is what are we doing above and beyond OWE if neither side authenticates?
Okay. I think that's, could you make that comment on the list?
Will do.
All right. So we have we don't have anybody saying no, so that's good. I think maybe we'll have a little bit more discussion on the list, but I think we can see if this is something that would be interesting to adopt. But it would be good for Mark to raise that on the list to make sure that we're not duplicating something that's already done somewhere. I don't think that's the case, but I don't know. All right, I'm going to stop this. So it's 11 yes and 0 no. All right, let's move on to the next presentation, which I think, let's take a look here. All right. Is that EAP PPT? Bart, are you online? I'm going to give you control of the slides. Oh, you're not. Your audio is not coming through.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. Almost there, I guess. Last day. I'm sorry I couldn't join you in person. Paresh actually has to excuse himself. He couldn't join remotely today as well. So I'll be holding the fort for both of us here. I'm not going to go through kind of what EPPT is anymore. I think we've covered that a few times now. I just want to kind of give a status update, talk about loose ends and next steps. So, PPT first appeared in July of 2024, and we presented it to EMU and the Privacy Pass working groups at IETF 120 in Vancouver, pretty much a little over a year ago. EMU working group kind of provided quite a lot of pre-adoption feedback actually, and that resulted in 2 new drafts. And then we got adoption by the working group. We presented to IETF 123 again in Madrid last time, and we were looking through kind of, okay, what is still open here? And I think there's one thing that we didn't really kind of close on, and kind of Alexander kind of raised was should EPPT be able to provide some kind of user identification or some kind of solution to deal with network abuse. So we did kind of look at that a little bit more in detail. And, if you kind of read the draft, obviously you'll see that we use identity-free credentials in EPPD, and we actually recommend not to include any user identifiers in the outer radius attributes. When we look at other EAP methods, both tunneled and not tunneled, but then specifically if you look at the tunneled credential transport ones, which are the ones in which the access network also doesn't get to see the credential, they also don't specify identity-based abuse methods. It doesn't mean that they don't exist, right? Things like chargeable user ID, for example, but they're typically not kind of called out in kind of the EAP method specification specifically. What we also see kind of like in practice is that these identity-based abuse control methods don't always work well because they only apply post-authentication, and a lot of the abuse happens actually pre-authentication. Lots of attacks happen when people try to authenticate with invalid credentials. And then what we also see is that there's often coordination required with, kind of these, AAA-based methodologies. So you've got the network team, you've got the AAA team, they have to coordinate, or even, the AAA is in different organizations, so different organizations have to coordinate. What we see in practice is that layer 2 mechanisms are often used, so MAC addresses. This is also not a perfect solution because MAC addresses rotate, but to date they're stable per BSS ID for at least 2 weeks. The advantage of MAC addresses is that they can control access pre-association, so you can actually exclude them from associating, so they actually won't authenticate. So also you won't have failed authentications for that device. And it doesn't require these entities to coordinate. And then I think 802.11bi was also brought up. This, will basically enable the MAC to rotate more frequently. Then the AP and the station will exchange permanent identifiers post-authentication. So that kind of solves the post-authentication problem. It doesn't solve the pre-authentication problem yet. So that's also still being discussed in 802.11. So, kind of in short, we kind of feel like this is out of scope for EPPT. There is some interesting work going on in the Privacy Pass working group on anonymous credit tokens. So what this would allow to do is for you to basically use the same attestation multiple times. And, when a token is spent, another token could be returned, so which is called a refund, basically, to the client, and as such, an identity could be associated across multiple sessions. Now we designed the EPPT to basically support any token type. However, anonymous credit tokens are a two-step process, right? And we do have a two-step process in EPPT, but we've kind of defined it for remediation purposes. So what we could still do, and we still need to discuss this, is kind of make that remediation exchange a little more generic, so we could support things like these anonymous credit tokens as well. So in the end, we don't want to, kind of specifically, I would say, define identity-based abuse. But what we can still do is look at, kind of this two-step authentication process and see if we can broaden our remediation kind of approach a little bit. So this will work as well. And I see we have some people in the queue already, so I'll
This is Alan. Just for information, there's been a lot of discussion this week among the Radius people about preventing abuse in a Radius proxy environment. So I'd suggest following RADEX for that, and this is probably not a subject for EMU or any specific method. It just makes it easier.
Okay, Janfred. Okay. Yeah, why don't you continue, Bart?
All right. So yeah, I mean, the only thing we'll still do here is kind of look at, anonymous credit tokens, which has not been adopted by Privacy Pass yet, I believe. So, but we will look at, supporting that type of tokens. So we think like we're ready for a kind of a more detailed review by the working group. So, we obviously want to ask you what the next step is, and we think that probably a more thorough review from a from the working group would be desired here. And then I think the last thing we still have to do is IANA registration. I think that, but I think this is only at the end of the process. So yeah, so I think that's where we are.
Okay.
Hi, Jan-Fred again. So as part of the review process, maybe one question from reading the draft, you mentioned channel binding, and you recommend using the channel binding method that is set in RFC 6677. My question would be, do you have a working proof of concept implementation of this already? And have you looked at the details for this channel binding? Because my experience or my understanding from what I've read about 6677 is that this channel binding method is not really effective in, oh, sorry, the feedback from is a little bit disturbing. Bart, your mic is feedbacking. Maybe you can mute when you're not speaking. Thank you. So the channel binding method in 6677 is not preventing all attacks that are given, and not all attacks that might also come to mind. So have you looked into that? Because this is not specific for EPPT, it's just general problem with all EAP methods, and I'm researching a little bit about all that in general. So maybe you have an answer for that already that I can then use to apply this to others as well.
Thank you, Jan-Fred. We do have a working prototype, but obviously, if there are existing attack vectors, and we could do it in a better way, then that would be interesting. Yeah, so your work would be of interest to us as well. Yeah. So like, I'm happy to follow up with you on that. Yeah.
Okay, so your prototypes already include the channel binding information as well.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, is the prototype available somewhere already, or is it currently just internal?
It's closed source, yeah. So it's not available open source yet. But we are, we are working on, something, on getting something open sourced. Yeah.
Okay, looking forward, and I'll ping you off list to discuss this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, just one comment on the different kinds of privacy pass tokens. We ought to be a little bit, think through, like when they have different kind of privacy properties, potentially, like especially between the ACT and the ART tokens, like there may be some extra additional linkability with the ACTs, depending on how you deploy them, and we ought to just be conscious of how that works.
Can you mute the mic again? You're echoing back into the room.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So just the different properties might be something we'd want to note or analyze or have some opinion about in the document.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Guhiland?
Thank you. So here is Guiling, yeah, from Huawei, Singapore. So yeah, I'm actually a new guy here. So I have a silly question. You mentioned something like the abuse identity or abuse authentication or something. So I would like to know, what does it mean for that? Can you explain a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that specific topic was around, how do you identify on a network a user that is abusing a service, right? Either an authentication service or basically abusing the network, and how do you subsequently potentially kind of deny service or remove that user from the network. So basically, it was around identifying users that exhibit bad behavior.
So is it similar or a kind of the like a DOS attack or DDoS attack?
Yeah, I mean, abuse could be a kind of a denial of service, denial of service attack when you're, I would say, performing failed authentication against a AAA, for example. Yeah, that's possible.
Okay. Anyway, yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, Alex Kluter, CoreMem Limited. Part of the abuse angle, picking up from your end, it's like as a site operator, it would be a case of this person's done something bad, I want to ongoing block them. And I can't see how I could communicate, or at the moment, the agreement is we see a chargeable user identity that could group multiple sessions together. Whilst I think your reply on the mailing list was, we can color this session with a unique identifier, but that's just for that session. I already have an identifier for that session and I can boot them off. I have no ability to prevent them coming back again. And I have no mechanism to communicate to the IDP saying, hey, this person, is there some machinery we can come up with to prevent ongoing abuse, like for a week or something medium term, not like for months and months, but I don't want to see or deal with them for a week because they get bored and walk away maybe. So having a session identifier is not really useful because as a visited site, I've already got one and I can just press a button and kick them off. But the problem is 2 seconds later, they're going to come right back on again. And there's no way to tie those two things together other than MAC addresses at the moment. And so it's kind of AUP kind of acceptable use policy violations, whilst things like the pre-connecting attacks you are describing, that I see that as something else. And Alan was describing whether that might lead into rate limiting or blocking outright the person more on the transport layers, like pushing the packets around. So it's kind of, they're different things. I'm not too sure tangling the two together is a great idea because we need a solution to different ones. And I think there's value keeping the user's complete privacy, but if MAC addresses are not going to be able to be used as a key, I think we can just predict over time it's going to be less and less useful. We have no way to block them outright.
Yeah, I mean, correct. I mean, I totally agree with your assertion. However, I mean, this problem exists for other EAP methods as well, right? So like if you use TTLS and you return a chargeable user ID that is temporary, you'll have the same problem.
No, but there's the difference with other EAP methods is there is a technical solution. You're choosing not to implement that. With this, I don't think the point of privacy passes, there's no way to tie these sessions together because where you're redeeming your tokens, all these different tokens, they're decoupled. You can't group them together. There is this concept of metadata, but now you're retracking the user with them, which you can't really lean on. And I think they're talking about just single bits really flying around. Yeah. So it's completely different because with other EAP methods, I maybe as an IDP would choose, I'm going to just put a session identifier in there, or I can choose to put something much more long-term in there. I actually can technically make that choice. With Passpoint, even if you wanted to, I don't think you can because the tokens and the IDP, the issuer of those tokens are completely decoupled.
Yeah, correct. But then, I mean, if you want the network to have like a permanent user identifier, then you would not use EPPT.
Completely agree.
Yeah.
So just responding to, I guess, the previous point on CUI, and I think maybe Alan's going to refer to deprecating insecure practices in the radius. That we've seen in the past that CUI was used to leak privacy. And I think now there are stronger recommendations to avoid leaking privacy via CUI. So whereas you may have thought you had an immutable identifier with CUI, and you can use CUI for various activities, actions, I think moving forward, those won't be available because people will stop leaking privacy via CUI. Thank you.
So yeah, this is Alan again. If you're using PPT on your local network, well, you know who the user is and you block them, and that's that. If you're using it in a roaming environment, then again, I would say it's probably best to deal with either at the radius layer, where the IDP goes, hey, the same user's trying a bunch of different things, I'm going to block him, or at some kind of policy layer where the visited network can, out of band, call the IDP and go, yeah, there's just one person who logged in on this access point at this particular time with this CUI. Please get rid of them. EduRoam has some processes for that. I haven't looked at the WBA open roaming in detail, but I'm sure there's something similar there. So I don't know that this is a problem that PPT has to solve.
Alex Cluter, just trying to follow on from Alan, were you proposing you could, because a home site, even as a home site, you do not know the identity of the user connecting. If someone's connecting on your local network using PPT, then they're not, you don't know who they are. That's the point. So communicating even beyond your boundaries, there's no mechanism you can lean on. You can't communicate this MAC address at this time was naughty because the redemption server can associate that with that token, but the token's now gone. And the other tokens, they're decoupled. There's nothing grouping them together. So I don't know. I think the chargeable user ID or deprecating insecure practices still allows for like a time limited thing per site and a unique ID, and that's great. But that's as a site operator, all you really care about. You just want to block them for a couple of days or a week. You're not looking to block them indefinitely or track them indefinitely.
So if I respond as well, I think we're kind of really focusing also on redemption here, but the token was generated by means of an attestation, and that attestation obviously involves the attester providing an assertion of an authorization for that specific user, right? And that could be very detailed. So that's potentially like that doesn't mean that you will that the network will get to see the identity of the user, but it does have a strong attestation that the requirements for that user to access that network were met. So there is that additional kind of attestation that happens, and that it's not that the user is coming in completely unauthorized here as well, right? So okay, that's it.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting. Can you mute again, Bart? Thank you. I think this is an interesting aspect of this proposal, in that there is this conflict between privacy and the ability to track a user. ACT isn't a privacy pass working group item yet. That could potentially provide some linking between, within a period of time. I believe it's a little, as Bart said, I think it could be accommodated in EPPT, but it's a little bit of a different interaction overall. So we'd have to think about that. And do we want that behavior, right? I mean, obviously from an operator's perspective, it might be desirable, but from a privacy perspective, it might not. We'd have to understand those criteria a little bit better. But what I'd like to do now is, ask if we could have a few people commit to reviewing PPT from various aspects of, if I could. So Alan, anybody else? I think Jan-Fred, have you already taken a look at it? Yeah, please post comments to the list as well. It's great to have that discussion. So we have a couple people, Bart, who are committing to look at it, and hopefully we'll get a couple more as well.
Thank you.
All right, I believe next we have TEEP v2.
Yay. Okay. I'll wait.
All right, here we go again. Whoops, I pressed the wrong button.
So yeah, the protocol that will never die. TEEP v1 is vaguely interoperable. It did not fulfill its design goals. There is interest in doing more with TEEP, and as the result, we may want TEEP v2. So the key derivation is complex. It does a whole bunch of stuff for each round, where you derive a key from the TLS key exporter, you mash it together with a bunch of stuff, which is not important for the purpose of the slide, but which is complicated. The MSK and or EMSK might not exist. The MSK might sometimes be 0. And the result is that everyone did something different for some of the key derivations. And therefore, officially, no one really operates with anyone else, except for one minor subset of TEEP v1 where you don't actually verify much of anything, because that's what Microsoft did. And everyone is interoperable with Microsoft, which is a very, very small subset of TEEP v1. So the crypto binding is tied to the authentication methods, except for when it's not, which means that you have even less security than you would like. There's large portions of the protocol which have not been implemented, that are put in there as one day let's use them perhaps if we can. So given that there's a lot of interest from enterprises, vendors, etc., in solving the use cases or extending the use cases for TEEP, it would be good to have interoperable implementations that actually implement the protocol as documented. The solution to that appears to be interoperate first and then write everything down. We have rough consensus from a couple of implementers to do this. So that looks positive. And one of the questions is, we probably only need one crypto binding exchange to verify that the tunnel has not been compromised, because we are authenticating the server, but there's no client certificate, so you can have compromise of the inner tunnel. The question then is, do we need to tie all the inner methods together again with the crypto binding TLV? Because one of the things that comes out of that at the end is the outer MSK and EMSK are derived from all of the inner methods. And that ties it all together. You have all kinds of really nice crypto properties, but it doesn't actually do that in TEEP v1. If we drop that for TEEP v2, you now have the possibility to forward the inner authentication somewhere else, which may or may not be a good idea depending on what we want. But if we're not going to tie the inner method to the outer TLS exchange for PKCS7 passwords, etc. Why are we doing it at all anywhere? So we need to double check exactly what we want from this and then see if we fix it. Do we implement PKCS7, PKCS10, or do we mark them as optional? As we've seen with unauthenticated EAP TLS and 5216 and follow on, it provides for it, but it doesn't say how. So no one implemented it and it doesn't work. It may be useful to explicitly strip out everything from TEEP v2 that isn't used and isn't implemented and go, we're going to figure it out later. And so long as we have some idea as to how we're going to do that, we can build TEEP v2 so that later things are not forbidden or prevented. And that's it. Do we want to do this? We have at least an initial agreement from a couple of implementers to do this and test it. Is this useful for a working group document? What's the time frame, etc.? All the usual questions. Joe.
So I'd say, kind of, is this something for EMU? It kind of does depend. If we build it, will people use it, right? So are people going to deploy it? Are people going to implement it? Is really an important question. I mean, I think there's probably a good answer to that, but we should try to verify that, because we could be doing a lot of work and spending a lot of time not really doing something that would be useful.
So Elliot has a bunch of use cases for it, which is good. The feedback from a lot of people is that the main benefits of TEEP whatever versus other EAP methods is the combined machine and user authentication. On one hand, putting both credentials on one machine doesn't necessarily improve security, but it at least gives you the information that the machine is on the network without the user being there, or the user is on the network on a particular machine. So it's really more about policy than doubling up on authentication. And there's a lot of people interested in that. So at least for that, there does seem to be interest in using TEEP.
Yeah, so that's good to know. It would be good to kind of maybe put down the requirements and the use cases somewhere. It doesn't have to be in a formal thing, but like, let's see if we can get that tracked on the list so we know what our goals are. And I think that will also be important, like as we look at crypto binding, like TEEP v1 kind of went overboard there because we didn't really analyze it, and we're just like, let's just bind it, right? It would be a good idea to kind of maybe think a little bit about the security goals, and maybe if there's something we're trying to achieve cryptographically, with like binding identity or some other kind of information, and whether we really need to do that and whether we really want to do that, because that's where some of the complexity comes from. And we probably would, we should find out what we think about those requirements. If those requirements are, pretty involved, then we may want to try to seek some formal analysis at some point.
Yeah, so I think what I'll do is I'll double check with people offline, and the easiest thing maybe just to spin up another revision of the draft with open questions at the start. That way it's written down and people can comment and we can discuss them.
Yeah, encourage discussion on like what we really want, to make sure that if we're going to take something on, that we know what it is.
Yeah. Okay.
So the plan is to remain compatible with the usual Windows use case, so that everything that now works with TEEP version 1 and how Windows does it continues to work with TEEP version 2 also.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We would rev the protocol, so Microsoft would have to update the supplicant at some point. But those use cases do seem to be popular. And so supporting that in TEEP v2 would be a hard requirement. Yeah. everyone's happy.
Any other comments?
Go for early lunch.
All right, so I think the first thing to do is to get those requirements together, and then we can look at timeframes and whatnot. All right, do we have any, I don't think we have anybody else scheduled. Am I leaving anybody off? Anybody else have anything they want to bring up? All right, then I think we can conclude our meeting today. Thank you, everybody, for participating, and we'll see you on the list and maybe in Shenzhen. Yes, you can bring it for yourself. You can't bring it alcohol or tobacco as a gift. But I'm not going to have a problem with you today. Just next time. It's very Canadian. Just next time. Free punch. Yeah, well, effectively, that's what the Canadian Border Control is telling you to do.
Yeah.
Shut up about it.
Just come out. Because of the paperwork. And it would be an awful waste to complicate it. Because we wouldn't be able to drink it either.
Well, yes, that was a decent amount of drink. But I'm glad we got her over the address.